Here's Brody Brazil.
So this is a pretty popular topic and discussion here on my YouTube channel. It's the idea of public money going to sports stadiums across the country. An ever-growing trend in the last 10 to 15 years. We've seen a lot of these renderings in different cities and teams, and everybody wants something brand new. They're all trying to keep up with each other. I don't see this changing in the next 10 to 15 years, this trend continuing. But what about who pays for all of these luxuries? It's something, again, that we talk about a lot here on the channel. I have yet to really ever offer my true opinion on it. My overall answer might surprise you. It's not even, yes, this is cool, or no, I'm against it. It just depends. Now, I know some of you do feel very much one way or the other. There's probably not a lot of folks in the middle ground here, but I'm just saying it kind of depends. There are some things I'm obviously against, and there are some things that I'm more okay with, but it all depends. So let me try and explain this. First things first, no two situations are identical. City to city, county to county, team to team, request to request, location to location, dozens of unique and individual variables. So how could I give you like that one size fits all answer, yes or no, it's always okay, or it's never okay? It largely depends who's getting what out of these deals. I also very much understand, for those of you who are very much against the idea of public money going towards like a private business or team or sports stadium, it's not an easy time. The combination of harder times, like where it's tougher to get money for schools and education and hospital and public services and firefighting, all of these things, it's harder times of where public money goes. There's no question about that. And also at the same time, when the sports economy is making hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in the same sentence. So it is obviously hard to justify a lot of public money or sometimes any public money for a sports stadium, but I'm still going to get to that it depends part in a second. There could be situations where the team and the public use each other. They scratch each other's backs to both win in these situations. And sometimes, whether you're the team or whether you're the public entity, it does take putting a little bit of something into it to get a whole lot out of it in return. And sometimes that's not even necessarily money or public funding. I take it back to a situation here in my region, in Oakland, in the Bay Area. The city of Oakland decided they weren't going to try and help the A's pay for their stadium at Howard Terminal, but what they did is went out and received grants, state and federal grants from other places, and brought those in. Those were already earmarked for the situation, so the public entity went out and helped the private sports team, but they didn't actually pay one dime on their own. They weren't committing to that in the very first place. Bottom line is, you can do this creatively. It's not as simple as yes or no or black or white. I'll tell you what happens too often, though. Teams are better experienced at negotiations and deadlines than maybe city council members are or county commissioners are. And politicians at those local levels, they can also be new and sometimes inexperienced. And I'm not saying that's their fault. They just got into politics. And I'm not always saying that's the case either. But if it's your first term and now a pro sports team is in your district and they're wanting something and they're putting all the weight on you and you're brand new at this and they've been doing it for 50 years and they've got a team of people and it's just you, like, you're outmatched. There's no question about it. And sometimes what happens too often here is that politicians can also let their fandom override their actual responsibility of the public interest and their constituents, and a team is putting all this pressure on them, and hey, they're a fan too. So they can't separate like their job from their allegiances. So that does happen as well. And then sometimes a team in a league, they'll use every tactic, including the threat of relocation, to get everything they want from a deal. And it's not even a negotiation back and forth. It's like, hey, here's our deal from the team. Take it or leave it, city and county. And that's that. And they kind of call game before the game was supposed to even be over or before there was any back and forth. That happens too often, and I realize that's what gets a lot of people upset. There are different levels of give here, right? And I think paying for a whole stadium, like I believe they did in Nashville for the Tennessee Titans, Like, that's a pretty high level of give. What's the receive? What's the return on that? We'll talk more about the take in just a second. But there's different levels of giving. Again, paying for a whole stadium is different than paying for some of it. It's different than paying for just the infrastructure only of a neighborhood, of sewers and electricity and stuff that maybe the city and county should provide a lot of times anyways. It's different than paying for 25 and 45-year renovations and maintenance, especially if the city or county owns the said facility. I mean, it's somebody's responsibility to keep it up to a certain standard, right? And then how about just maybe giving control of land sometimes to collect taxes in the long run in return? Again, we were talking about the give and take earlier, and it depends. And I hope you've stuck around this long. This is why you can't necessarily say yes or no, like full send. It's got to be sometimes it depends. What if the city or county has a chunk of land, nobody else was going to use it? They either give it up for free or give it away on a very sweetheart deal so that eventually when the team builds their stadium there, they can collect more revenue and taxes from it, right? So there is give and take to all of this. This is one of the lowest levels of give. Here, we'll give you this land. Let's see what you do with it to get a lot back in return. Why wouldn't that be good for a city, a county, and a community? How about the levels of get? I said give and take. Well, this is give and get. Does the city and county also own the said facility? And do they benefit from taxes on site and brand new concessions and sales that if they didn't build this brand new building, stadium or arena or whatever, they wouldn't have received all this extra return from it? Does the public actually own the building and then have the ability to operate the building and lease it out and have events there and then sell the building maybe at the end of a 30-year term and make a bunch of money off that? Like, that's a great perk for a city and a county. And if those things were written into deals, how could you say no, like that's a bad idea? Does the sports stadium produce a finite amount of job creation? Let's not forget all the things that come with a stadium. Right? It's not just the camaraderie of a team and the community building. It's also the actual fact that people are employed. They're working there on a regular basis. And then can that stadium tangibly prove its value, its worth, and its benefit? Right? Like, if you do this project and if the math can be shown to the public, hey, look at what we did. This was a good investment. We put in X amount 10 years ago, and look what we've been doing in the 5, 10, 15, 20 years since. That's how you gain traction with the public. That's why it depends. If you can do this, how could I say no to this? If you can show tangible benefits, right? Like, all the estimates of public contributions at first, and this is kind of one of my problems, and this is where things slip up, and this is why sometimes I'm kind of dreaming here on this. All the estimates of public contributions and returns, they're all promises that can't be made or can't be held up. And like in real life, they just don't add up. Sure, we're going to sell out this place for 30 years and we're going to have, full houses every night. It doesn't ever work that way. It never does. So why think you're different? Why think you're brand new? Why think you're unique? The promises and the projections, they rarely ever fully live up to real life. Sometimes they do, but quite often they don't. Can public contributions and the value in return, like I said, can this be documented? Can this be made public? Is it so tangible that you can see instead of, well, these were the promises, but what's the actuality of it? If you can do that, I've got no problem with you doing what you say, what you said you were going to do. And even if something were a wash over 30 years, right? Even if a city or a county put in $35 million, $350 million, whatever the total is, if let's say in 30 years, right, which is the total commitment here, if they made back that $350 million plus the interest that they would have received of that 350 sitting in a bank account somewhere. So it's more, it's going to be a lot more, but it's over 30 years. If you could just make all it back and in 30 years, everything was an absolute wash, is that a bad thing? Again, so long as you're not losing money, losing credit, losing potential, what's the harm? If you're at the very least breaking even on it, I realize you could have done something better with it, but breaking even isn't the worst thing either. I do also think that there should be some unwritten rules here. These don't ever really exist, but I think they should. Once a public entity commits to a private team's existence, once they cut them a deal, once the public makes it a lot easier on the private sports team to have a stadium or exist, that team should have it almost impossible time ever leaving that region, that city, that county, that whatever. It's kind of that way with the Modell law in the state of Ohio, right? So they've got it where the Browns are trying to leave Cleveland to go to a suburban city, and they're trying to say, wait, Cleveland gave you resources for a new stadium. So you can't leave. You have a lifetime commitment now that you have to stay in Cleveland. I mean, if private businesses like a team, if they never take a dime, then okay, fine. It's their call. If they've paid their way like anybody and everybody else, like you and I would have to most of the time, then it's their call. It's the private entity's call. But once the public helps you out and builds you a home and a stadium and cuts you deals and tax breaks and all that stuff, taking a rent discount, collecting your own taxes on site, property tax credits, all that stuff is a form of help. Once that happens, it's like you shouldn't just be able to walk away at any point since you've been helped. And I'll tell you what really needs to stop is a couple different things here. The expectations of teams get everything they want or they'll leave town. The threat of relocation by professional sports teams, it's become contagious. And it's happened a few times in the last several years. And this is not new, right? This has been going on for decades. But it seems like more and more, and recently especially, this is kind of the first thing that they go to. It's like bringing a weapon to a fist fight. I'll tell you another one that's really hard to stomach here is places like cities and counties that give everything in a deal and get nothing in return. Now, you're saying, well, what does it matter to me if they're halfway across the country? I don't care about them. Yeah, but it sets a precedent for bad leverage because then teams can point to those places and say, well, they got it done because city and county X gave team Y everything they wanted. And if we don't get that same deal, look at them, we want the same deal. Otherwise, we're out of here. Right? So at some point, that trend has to stabilize a little bit. Another thing, like I said before, are people that buy into every single promise and projection made about a stadium project. Like they only see the most glorious path forward and it's all going to be rainbows and unicorns and this is how it's going to work out for everybody. It's not going to work out that way. So stop believing every single thing that you see. And on the flip side, though, there are some contrarians to projects who just don't want anything to happen and they don't want to spend anything to try and get everything back. They want to spend nothing and receive everything. It also doesn't work that way either. There is some happy middle ground here to be had, some sensible middle ground of how a city and a county can participate to help a team to some degree, right? We're talking about public contributions here. Is that money? Is that time? Is it any creative way to help? I'm open to creative ways for certain. And the last thing here that needs to stop is that stadiums having a 30-year lifespan, like we shouldn't be going through this process so often. We shouldn't have it so that NFL teams play 5 seasons and already they look at their stadium and say, you know what, it was good 5 years ago or 10 years ago and we thought it up. It's not anymore. We need $400 million to fix it. It's ridiculous. You play 8 to 9 home games there per regular season. Stadiums should last decades upon decades. I mean, 50 years at the minimum. And of course, there can be some overhauls along the way. I think 25 and 50 years are good tune-up spots to fix things, to improve things, overhaul them. But the fact that we here in the United States are replacing stadiums at about the 30-year mark on a regular basis, it's hard to conceive. And it also doesn't stop this problem. It only amplifies this problem. Every other team sees renderings of every other team and what they're doing, and they want something that looks just like this, or they feel like their fans need this to compete with the product across the board. Anyway, I don't know if that's what you expected from me. I don't really mean to take one side or the other here. I just think like largely it depends. You can't say absolutely yes, it's a good idea. You also can't say no, it's always a bad idea. Situationally, there are times where you can benefit mutually from situations, and obviously, I'd like to see more of that for everybody, but I also understand why sometimes it's the information cycle. Stuff comes out, you hear the bits and pieces of it, it doesn't all make sense, and that's why here on this channel, I'm always trying to provide the bigger picture. Thumbs up down below, really appreciate that. Helps me, this video, and the channel. This is the end of the video, so take 1 second before it's done. Make sure you're subscribing to the channel. That way I can definitely see you back here next time.